in the darkest days of the Second World War, how the Nazi armies over there wished they could be standing here on the white cliffs of Dover. But ranged against them was the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and yes, even Dad's army. But there was one more fighting force. It was the people who lived in Britain's countryside and on the coast. And this is their story of how the countryside fought the Second World War.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. Men will say, this was their finest hour.
The Second World War was felt in every part of the country. It united the nation, both town and countryside, as never before. Our historian, Bettany Hughes, discovers how the landscape shaped our fighting forces.
I'm going to be investigating how, during the Second World War, ancient survival techniques from the Highlands were used to produce a thoroughly modern military elite.
Rachel de Tame meets some of the women who mucked in the fight to keep the nation fed.
I travelled to Cheshire to find out how British agriculture was utterly transformed by the war.
Mike Robinson, our wild food chef, is hoping to cook up a wartime feast at his home in Berkshire. But he'll need to catch the main ingredient first.
Well, there we are. That's Mrs. Mott's dinner sorted.
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Let's say goodbye with a
When war broke out in September 1939, the countryside was quick to do its bit. Nearly 3 million children left the towns and cities for rural safety. The evacuation took 4 days and was the biggest ever mass movement of people in this country's history. Len Townsend was one of the children to make that journey.
I was 9 years old when the war broke out, and I was living in Bethnal Green, East London. I didn't realise we were poor. I was having too good a time. I was fed, I was warm, I was clothed, and as far as I was concerned, everything was a happy sort of situation. Didn't realise what war was going to be at all.
Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister, Margaret Rose, and I feel so much for you.
I just remember going to the school with my brother, with our little haversacks, meeting all the others and the teachers, and marching from there to Bethnal Green Station and going on the train. I thought we were coming on holiday until I was on the train, when the teacher gave me a great big thick exercise book. And I said, well, have we got to go to school then, sir? And he says, yes. I came away with my big brother. He was 2 years older than me. I was 9, he was 11. And so he was my cushion from leaving home, as it were. I was still attached to the family.
Len and his fellow evacuees were sent to the tiny village of Pakenham.
I think they came to Bury by train, and local coaches brought them round to the villages, and there was a billeting officer. And there's 2 for you, missus, and 1 for you. Did you want a boy or a girl? But they were children. But I felt sorry for them, because they were like a duck out of water.
We were dropped off by coach in the village, and I remember sitting outside the village hall, waiting to be picked up. Very hot day, all best clothes on. Brother Bill was with me, and the man arrived in this car and said that we were going to live with him, and so we both went off with him in the car. And the silly little thing that I do remember is a wasp flying around in the car, and we didn't get very many of those in Bethnal Green.
you still got your label on.
Yes, it's not the real one, it's one that I made up. But that is the badge of our association, the Evacuees Reunion Association.
What did you make of this place when you landed here, straight out of Bethnal Green?
Wide open spaces. What do we do? There was nothing that we could do that we did in London. Pakenham was just one street, 2 shops and a pub. You couldn't play hide and seek because there was nowhere to hide. You couldn't play knocking down ginger, knocking on doors and running away because there was nowhere to run to. So we learned other things. We learned birds' habitats, the sound of a snipe diving, the way a peewit lives in a field and makes a funny noise to chase you away from its nest.
Did your mum ever come and see you?
Yes, she did. At the height of the Blitz, her and my nan came down and took rooms in the village for a while. And they could only stay for a while because they couldn't afford to keep 2 homes going.
What did she make of the village? Because, I mean, it's very different to Bethnal Green.
Very different to Bethnal Green. It wasn't what she made of the village, it's what the village made of her, really. When she turned up at the pub, which the local ladies didn't do on their own, she turned up at the pub with my nan, and eyebrows raised because ladies on their own weren't normally seen.
They were shocked by that, were they?
Absolutely shocked, yes. Yes, it wasn't the done thing. And then my nan decided to do something that's normally done around the East End. She put a red hot poker in her beer. And it shocked the socks off these people. They'd never seen it done before.
What did she do that for?
They used to warm their beer up. They didn't like it cold.
Did you miss your mum?
Yes, yes. I felt love from Mum, but I didn't feel love from any of the billets that I was in. I wasn't ill-treated, I wasn't loved, and I wasn't at home.
Do you ever see anybody, that was in the village when you were here?
Yes, only now and again because we don't get back to the village very often, but Michael Bryant, who owns the mill down near Exworth.
Oh, you got your label on.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And you?
Good.
It's a long while since I saw your label.
Yes, I know. many, many years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you really think of it when you got here?
Well, it was such wide open spaces. There were no houses or buses or people. There were there were no shops.
What do you want shops for?
Well, it was totally different from where I
You
live.
don't need shops if you haven't got any money.
Well, yeah.
We hadn't.
No, most people didn't have much money.
Yeah.
But then when you got to the shops, after time, there was nothing in them.
Nothing in the shop.
No.
Yeah.
But now they're not there anymore.
What
so
was
it's
the
another
name of
change.
your schoolmaster who came with you?
Mr. Dyer was the headmaster.
Yeah, and then
Mr. Tilsley.
Tilsley. I remember he got invited to a half-day shooting at Nether Hall.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And they gave him a gun.
Yeah.
And then one of Mr. Gray's hens fluttered up and he shot the hen.
Shot the hen.
Yeah.
That's how much we knew about snipe.
So they took his gun away and gave him a stick.
Yeah. Yeah. It was an experience that formed part of my life, and it's something that would never be forgotten. Now and again I hear the song of a blackbird in the bushes, and that brings me straight back to Pakenham.
Yeah.
For some reason, I can imagine myself walking down the Thurston Road and the blackbird in the evening just going down through the hedge and singing its heart out, and it always brings me straight back here.
It wasn't just children who were sent away to safety. Another type of evacuation was also taking place during the war, but this one was kept top secret. Bettany Hughes has journeyed to North Wales to find out more.
My family's been farming here in North Wales for about 300 years. We were living at the farm here when the war broke out. And we just saw the moving about. When my father used to be up in the mountain with the sheep, attending to the sheep, the official would be passing, he might stop and, talk. It was all right as long as he was doing the talking. But as soon as my father was to turn on to him and ask, what's happening up there? Or what's going on? The only answer he would get was something unique all the time. That was their answer, was something unique.
In the early years of the war, it wasn't just children, was it, who were sent deep out into the countryside?
Yes, that's right. The National Gallery sent its entire collection to Wales. Everything, 1,800 paintings, all the most famous pictures that everyone knows, works by Rembrandt, Titian, Leonardo, everything.
It is quite bizarre in a way, isn't it, thinking of these grand old masters being sent out into this beautiful wilderness. Larry and I followed the painting's journey to the quarry where they were kept and where Welsh slate is still mined today. It's fairly difficult to negotiate around here, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks it. I think this is the bridge, the famous bridge where our largest picture had considerable difficulty getting under.
I'm not surprised, it's tiny.
It's the biggest case, but I hadn't appreciated the road had such a bend as well. The tires had to be lowered on the lorry and it barely went through. So they had to dig out the road to get it past.
Which painting was so high that it was, you know...
That was the Van Dyck, Charles I, in a special purpose-built case, travelled on the diagonal so it wouldn't be quite as high, and they called it the elephant case.
You certainly realise how remote it is when you get out here. Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? Because you really are, you're following in the painting's footsteps.
Yes, very literally right now, anyway.
Moving paintings between galleries is quite common nowadays and a highly skilled art. In the 1940s, though, it was very unusual, a huge responsibility. But the orders came from the top. Winston Churchill declaring, "Hide them in the caves and cellars, but not one picture shall leave this island." So what's it like coming in, Larry?
It's extraordinary. It really is more impressive than the photographs would suggest.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, one thing I don't understand is that there are caves and quarries all over the country. So why here? What made this place special?
It's because that on top of the roof chambers, you've got another 20 metres then of granite. And I think then it was literally impossible to penetrate, you know, when they were bombing.
Yeah.
So it was a very good place to keep all the paintings.
It's kind of natural bomb shelter, I
Yeah,
guess.
it is, yeah.
When you come down here, it gets really freezing and we've got drops of water rain down on our heads from the roof. This hardly feels like the perfect environment to keep paintings in.
I know it seems unlikely, but one thing it has is it's very, very constant, the conditions. So what was done was buildings were constructed, brick structures inside the caves, and they could be heated to a set degree, which would bring the humidity down, and it would stay very, very stable for the duration of the pictures being here.
Have you seen these buildings?
Yeah, just down there.
Why can't we get down there now?
It's not too safe there. It's, you know, where we've been blasting outside, the roofs now have collapsed.
I tell you what, I actually think it's very moving coming here because, you know, we know what effort went into making those paintings, the blood, sweat and tears, and then this raw slate became their protecting fortress. We should give our thanks to the quarry and the mine. Within just 10 days of Germany's unconditional surrender in 1945, some of the paintings were brought triumphantly back into London. Londoners had suffered terribly during the war, and the National Gallery itself had been bombed. These Welsh hills really were the salvation of the paintings. And in fact, elsewhere in the country, man and nature had also worked together to try to defeat the nation's enemy.
Countrywise is at war, the Second World War. We're looking at how the countryside played its part in the biggest fight of our lives. In May 1940, over 200,000 British troops were trapped by the Germans on the Dunkirk beaches in northern France. In an unprecedented move, the British government turned to the country's rural and seaside communities for urgent help.
I'm John Tough, and my grandfather was involved with collecting 106 of the little ships before the Dunkirk evacuation. My grandfather was running a boatyard which was making motor torpedo boats. They were building prototypes, so it was a lot of responsibility. He was, in effect, they were cutting-edge design at the time. My grandfather was phoned by the Admiralty. Initially, the instructions were simply to collect as many small seaworthy boats as possible. When he first got the call, he wasn't told why the boats were being collected.
What's it all about, Mr. Town? I can't tell you any more than I have already. That's precisely nothing. There must be some reason. There are boats you've taken. Perhaps the commander here can tell you. I can't.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I'm not allowed to tell you the reason. But I can assure you it's official.
At the moment, we're in Teddington, which is 93 miles from the sea. The majority of the boats that are here would have been private pleasure boats or passenger boats. They were just literally at the bottom of people's gardens.
OK, she's free. Let her go astern.
What are you doing with my husband's boat? Bring it back at once.
I'm sorry, ma'am. She's commandeered.
They simply went along in a tug and said, that boat will do, and they took it away from the moorings. The instructions were to take off any personal effects of the boats they commandeered, put on fuel, and then supply crew, so one skipper and one engineer, in theory, for each boat. So it's 200-odd men that he had to find that were competent. Obviously, there were a lot of the men were out already fighting, so he was looking at more mature boat owners, and also there were lots of youngsters, lots of the Sea Scouts and Sea Cadets that actually went over.
Yeah. What can I do for you?
I want to sign, sir.
How old are you?
19, sir.
The Navy couldn't let civilians go into a war zone, and so those that went were actually signed up as naval ratings or naval officers for a month. It's a 12-hour trip at the best of times to get from Teddington down to Ramsgate. Then they had to get them over from Ramsgate and Dover over to Dunkirk. They were going through mined areas of sea. The Luftwaffe were bombing, so it wasn't a good place to be. So it was 2 or 3 days to get from Teddington out to the beaches at Dunkirk. The Luftwaffe actually realised that instead of trying to shoot up or bomb the men on the beaches, if they went for the boats, all the men were together. So, you know, a boat of this length, of 40 foot, could have 60 or 70 men on board, just for the trip from the beaches out to the ship. And if they could sink one of these boats, they could kill more men. It must have been quite a bizarre sight for the men on the shore to see ships' lifeboats, the Thames fireboat, and all of these vessels all coming together to rescue them. There were 800 little ships that took part. And we work it out there's about a quarter of them were lost over there. They rescued 338,000 men. We've never actually sat down and tried to work out how many men were rescued on the boats that my grandfather sent over, but he really did make a difference. I'm convinced he wouldn't have actually said it was such a major thing that he did, but it is one of those points in British history, and what he did changed things.
This boat is in the service of one of Britain's oldest fishing industries, cockling. Leaving Leigh-on-Sea, the Osbornes, on the family Borley as the boats are known, set out for the mud banks along the Essex coast. There lies the buried treasure of Cardia Medullae, in other words, cockles by the billion.
Long floating. It wasn't just the riverboats that were called upon to help with the Dunkirk rescue. In 1940, there were 6 tiny cockle boats in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex. When the shout went out for help, they all responded, saving over 1,000 men. Trevor Osborne's family played their part. This is the kind of boat your father went to sea into fishing?
Yes, it was. When he started off as a young boy with my grandfather, yeah.
And fishing for what?
Cockles. Cockles, yeah. Just cockles, that's all. And they did a bit of shrimping as well, but mainly it was cockles.
How do you catch cockles?
Well, in those days, they would beach the boats and they'd go over the side like a garden rake, and they'd rake them out the ground and they'd skim up into little little lavnet, and then they put them into baskets and carry them aboard the boat.
So it's not really fishing work in a sense, it's it's manual work, isn't it?
Oh, it's very much manual work, yes.
Hard work.
It was hard work, yeah.
It's a good boat, it's a strong boat, but it is a small boat, isn't it? I mean, it really is a little ship.
That's right, they are little ships, but very, very strongly built.
How did your father get word that he was needed at Dunkirk?
They'd been working over at Whitstable Flats, I think it was on a Thursday, and when they came in, I think he said the police were down there to said that they were, the boats were wanted to be commandeered. But my grandfather was down there, said if the boat's going to be commandeered, he wanted the family to take the boats, which is what they did with all the boats. They all skipped by their families.
But your father didn't go, did he? Why was that?
No, he'd been down to sign on, as they all had that night, and having signed on, he slipped at the top of the stairs and hit his head, cut his head open, the doctor wouldn't let him go.
That must have been hard for him to stay behind and watch the other man go.
He felt terrible for the rest of his life, knowing that his cousin and his brother got lost.
Because you lost an uncle and a cousin. What happened?
They were coming back from Dunkirk and she'd had engine trouble, so they were taken in tow by one of the other cocker boats called Letitia, and he chucked 3 fathom of the rope across. I think it was 1:10 in the morning, and they thought, oh, great, we can rest up. At 1:50, Waffa Dentster, there was one almighty bang,
yeah,
and all that was left was the tow rope, as he'd chucked it 40 minutes before. There's nothing left at all.
Just an explosion?
An explosion.
What happened? Hit a
mine? They hit a mine.
Mm.
That's the conclusion, that it was a mine. He'd always said if he'd gone, would he be able to sort the engine out? Would they have had to have a tow line? Could he have done this? Could he have done that? But all this was going through his mind for 60 odd years, but that's the way it went. I was very privileged to go this year. I felt absolutely honoured to go to Dunkirk and represent the family.
On this ship?
I went on this ship, yeah. It's,
what was that like?
It was brilliant. As we left Ramsgate Harbour, I forget the name of the ship that came out, one of them was playing There'll Always Be in England. And as we got into Dunkirk Harbour, there was the local band there was playing all the Glenn Miller swing songs of that era, and it brought tears to your eyes. I mean, they made us so welcome because they know what a miracle was performed by the boats.
They say an army marches on its stomach. Well, so does a nation. After Dunkirk, attacks on shipping became increasingly common and food supplies became scarce. After the break, Rachel de Thame on the fight to keep us fed. The war changed the countryside, and in return, the countryside changed the war. The farms needed an army to step up production to feed the nation. Rachel de Thame now on the women whose only weapon was a pitchfork.
Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies above. Don't fence me in, let me ride through the wild.
More than 80,000 girls enrolled in the Women's Land Army. Jean Proctor from Stockport was one of the first.
Jean, what was it that made you want to join up?
Well, I was walking along the street and I saw this poster that was, well, it was a girl with golden hair, and she was looking up at the sun, and she got a sheaf of corn under her arm, and it said, "Come and join the land army, work on the land." And I thought, oh, that does look nice. And so, as I say, I joined up. When what a shock. It was nothing at all like that. It was a big bit of a con, I think, really. They should have showed the poor girl in the winter with out in the field, in the potato field, with a sack on her head, a sack on her back, and a sack round her bottom, and picking or doing vegetables, doing turnips and potatoes in the wet, pouring rain.
Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies.
I really hadn't a clue to what it was going to be at all. And it was quite a rude shock, I can imagine. You can imagine having to get up first thing in the morning and go out into the cow shed and learn to milk, because of course I couldn't do it because it was, you know, you were trying and that's on, you get the odd squirt. And they say, oh, come on, you're not trying, you know. I thought to myself, oh, what's happened to the poster, you know?
Did you feel that you had a good way with the animals? I mean, not having had experience before?
They were nice. Cows were nice, and they are nice. They've got lovely faces. But I used to have to go and fetch them at first thing in the morning to bring them in. Cow! Cow! Cow!
It was obviously an enormous amount of work, really hard physical graft.
It was really physical. There was no resting. You didn't stop all day from the time you got up. There was no rest periods. We all looked at it like, well, the soldiers are doing this and they've got no sit down for a cup of tea and half time in the red trenches. We're doing our bit. But of course the farmers' wives and that didn't look at it like that. They didn't like us at all because, I mean, it's obvious when you think about it. We took, their sons had gone to war and we took their places, and the farmers felt the same thing, you know. Oh, you can't do that, you know. Oh, you can't do that. So, because I'll bloody show you. Oh, I'm sorry, I've been doing some swearing. I'll show you, and we did. We were doing men's jobs. It was downright hard work. I had huge muscles. When I got married, I could pick my husband up in the air like nobody's business.
I met up with Hilda and Dorothy, two of Jean's Land Army friends.
Now, I know that as well as the agricultural work and what you were doing in the fields and the milking and so on, you had to do some quite unpleasant things. There was a lot of vermin to deal with, wasn't there?
Oh, yes.
One of you
Dorothy,
Dorothy, that was your job. But a lot of young girls, I mean, they're afraid of mice, let alone rats.
No, well,
how did you manage to do it?
When this friend, one of the girls, asked me to go with her, to partner with her, and I said, oh, no, not me. I said, I'm frightened of a mouse.
I couldn't have killed rats like she did. That's something I couldn't have done.
And you look so gentle as well.
And you know, she was such a little pretty thing. Oh. You can't believe that she'd go about bashing rats on their heads. Didn't you get some money for a tail?
No. Some counties
some of them got a farthing for a tail.
Some counties got a penny a tail, but we never did.
How rich would you have been if you'd had a penny a tail?
Well, I wouldn't have been here now, I'll tell you.
By the end of the war, land girls like Jean, Hilda and Dorothy had helped cut Britain's dependence on imported food by a staggering 50%.
That was our part of helping to win the war, wasn't it, really?
Yes.
You know, so we enjoyed it as well. There was an admiral, he said, that the Land Army helped to win the war. Without it, there wouldn't have been war, because he said the army have to eat food. If you have no food, you have no army, so therefore you would have no war victories. So he said if we hadn't fed the army and the country like we did, we wouldn't have won the war. So it's a very nice thought, really. We did our bit. Yeah. The land girls were very misunderstood during the war. They thought, in a lot of ways, they thought we were a lot of good time girls. And actually, if they'd known the true facts, we were really some of the backbone of England. We were doing what the lads were doing in the trenches, we were doing in the fields. And that's why we call it, we fought in the fields, because that is what we did. We'd got to within 14 days of starvation. And that was when the Land Army really got to, we dug up everything and we did everything we were asked. We never refused to do anything, and that's why we got through and why the farmers didn't want us to leave when we left. They didn't want us to come, but they didn't want us to leave.
The astonishing achievement of the Women's Land Army isn't the only reason that Britain didn't go hungry during the war. Everyone was encouraged to make the food that they did have go as far as possible, as our Countrywise wild chef Mike Robinson has been discovering near his home in Berkshire.
I've got more than a dozen villagers coming round tomorrow for a real proper wartime feast. But first of all, I've got to catch the main ingredient. Come on, Sass. To find out exactly what I'll need, I'm off to see local villager Mrs. Mott, an experienced wartime cook.
Hello, how are you today?
It's lovely to see you.
Good.
I'm all right.
Yeah.
Got the gun. Shall we go inside?
Yeah, we might as well.
Lovely. Come on, Sassy. Well, Mrs. Mott, as you know, tomorrow I've got a whole bunch of locals coming round to eat some real wartime food at the pub and from the village here. And I really need your help.
Well, I don't know whether I'll be a lot of help, but I'll do what I can.
Well, you were a noted sort of cook during the war. And are very renowned for it in the village. We're talking about wartime food. So what's the food were you allowed to have during the war? Because I know rationing was pretty tight.
Well, this is one person's ration for a week. So if you use it all at once, you won't have anything to eat at the weekend. And that's your meat ration. So I suggest you get your gun and go out, but don't shoot yourself, shoot the rabbit.
Okay.
And then you'll be all right.
And would you show me the ration book and what's going on?
Oh, yeah, well, we had one of these, which you guarded with your life and death, these, because this kept all your stuff in, your fat, your sugar, your sweet ration. I mean, that little bit of cheese to last you a week. Well, I look at it now and think, God, I'd use that in a day.
So, Mrs. Mott, what's your advice on what to do tomorrow?
I don't know, you've got to stretch it and make it go a long way, haven't you? So you'll have to have a look round and see what you've got in your garden for a start off, and if you've got a nice little bunny about anywhere to enhance the dish, you can either cook him and chop him up and put it in, or you can serve him separately if you want to, if you've got enough.
Perfect.
Mike! Don't forget, 2 nice plump rabbits.
Will do, Mrs. Mott.
My butter.
For my mission today, I'm trying to shoot wood pigeons and rabbits. Now, I'm going to use 2 kinds of gun. This is my grandfather's lovely old 1880s 12-bore double-barreled shotgun. Now, this is perfect for shooting pigeons.
Everybody says I'm old-fashioned.
Excellent, got one. Okay, Sass, come on. Where's he gone? Come on, find it. Get down very low. I've also got my .22 caliber rifle, brilliant for the rabbits. Shotguns are for flying and moving game. The rifle is for stationary game at a greater distance. Okay, we got him. That's Mrs. Mott's dinner sorted. After a long day's hunting, I've finally got everything I need. So it's back to the kitchen to prepare for tomorrow's wartime feast. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. We're going to present a series of dishes for you, inspired by Mrs. Mott. And the first one we're doing, a very good old-fashioned British dish here. I've got a brawn that we've made. OK, proper old-fashioned brawn. I'm going to pop it here for the moment. You'll find out in a minute, I'll tell you. I've also got a beautiful rabbit pie in suet pastry. OK, trust me, it's delicious. You're here, so you're going to taste it. You're not getting away unless you do. And I'm going to get the last dish now.
If you were in forces, perhaps you did that.
OK, folks, here we go. Here's our last dish. This is a pigeon pie. Short crust pastry, lovely wild wood pigeons from the area. Absolutely delicious. I'm going to put this in front of Mrs. Mott.
It looks lovely, doesn't it?
I'm quite nervous about this.
No, you're not.
There's wood pigeon, and it's cooked in Mr. Mag's beer, and then it's got peas from the garden in it.
Well, that is disgusting. They're nice. That is horrible.
They don't like the brawn.
I've never eaten pigeon before.
Well, it's the first time for everything.
First time ever.
Even sex.
Really, it's not sex. Which bit is horrible?
I hope somebody likes it. I'm going to show you where the brawn comes from on the pig. Here we go. OK, so... there we are. That's where the brawn comes from.
That is just scary. Is it real?
It's real. And all that lovely meat under there on the cheeks and everything is what we make the brawn out of. Because you know what the worst thing in the world is? To waste food. And in the war, they couldn't afford to waste food. So people of your age would have eaten this happily.
If I was in the war, I would have eaten it, even if I didn't like it.
Yep, you would. Because you were hungry.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I should have stayed at home.
Every last bit of the countryside was given a job in winning the war, even the landscape had a part to play. After the break, we go to Scotland with Bettany Hughes, to the mountains and to the glens, which played their part in bringing to an end a bitterly fought war. Bettany Hughes now travels to the Highlands of Scotland, where the wild and isolated landscape provided an ideal training ground for an elite force.
For centuries, this landscape has been scarred by one battle after another. But since the beginning of recorded time itself, this has also been a place where men have learnt how to survive. And in 1940, the War Office latched onto this. From that moment, volunteers started to arrive here to take part in an incredibly gruelling form of training exercise. If this was something that they survived, then they had a chance to win a coveted prize, the Green Beret, a sign that they were now fully fledged commandos. I'm keen to discover how this wild landscape in the foothills of Ben Nevis helped shape the very concept of the commando. So what was the idea behind the creation of the commandos?
The commando idea came in a context of kind of military disaster. This is the summer of 1940, the fall of France, the evacuation from Dunkirk, and Britain is left having to defend itself against a possible invasion. But the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was not content to let it rest at that. What he specifically asked for was that a new force would be created of highly trained soldiers to carry out kind of hit-and-run raids on enemy-occupied Europe, to send a message to the enemy that we're still fighting, but also to send a message to the British public that you know, the British fighting spirit would carry us through.
So why here? What's so special about it?
Commandos were meant to be able to look after themselves. They weren't going to have massive support. They would attack. They would go in on their own. So the ground here, the mountain terrain, the proximity of water. You know, we've got these lochs coming in. They could practice landings from the sea. That's how they were going to attack. They could take them up Ben Nevis on speed marches, and also just the challenging weather. I mean, we're standing here in the rain. You know, this is not unusual. It was the idea of the Highlands as a test of physical strength, but also of mental strength, of character as well. You know, commandos were, as they were first conceived, they were expected to be kind of ruthless killers.
Yeah.
They were going to be creeping up on people and you know, sentries and so on, killing them.
In 1940, the Achnacarry estate was requisitioned for its ideal terrain, and within 2 years, it was the main location for training commandos. The irony is, like, it just looks so perfectly peaceful now, doesn't it?
Yeah, you've got to try and imagine the opposite, really. You know, in the 1940s, this is a hive of activity out here in front of the house. You've got hutted accommodation. Didn't look like this. There was a parade ground, hutted accommodation, and there's all sorts of different types of training going on. You know, unarmed combat over here is being taught. Over here, knife fighting, and orders being barked out, and sound coming from all around you.
I mean, there's a part of it that feels a bit like a kind of boy's own adventure, but they are using live ammunition, so it's very real.
It's very real, and live ammunition was a feature. I mean, it wasn't being fired at them; it was being fired over their heads when they were doing landing training over in different parts of the estate. But you know, the purpose behind it was pretty brutal. So you know, you're getting taught knife fighting here, which is not something that other soldiers would be learning.
My name is Stanley Wilfred Scott, and I was with No. 3 Commando, 3 Troop. I was 18 and a few months when I actually arrived at Achnacarry, the training centre around Achnacarry House. Myself, like everybody else, thought, what sort of a dump is this? We arrived in the pouring rain after an 8-mile march. When I first got here, amongst everybody else, we marched in the gate and there was this line of crosses in front of the mission up there. And each cross had a label on it or a plate saying this man advanced over cover, this man did that wrong, this man did that wrong. It was a warning to the new recruits. They were allowed 5% casualties up here in the training. And I'm afraid to say this, but it did happen. That was the start. We trained from the first morning here. We found out the hard facts of life. They're not going to stop walk for the rain or snow or anything, so that was that. The discipline was so that you did it. And the training went on like that, minute, right, for 6 weeks, non-stop. The only local people we met was like deer stalkers, they called it fieldcraft. Out to approach using cover and camouflage to an objective, to a target, especially the snipers. If the wind's coming from behind you to the deer, he's going to whiff you, he's gone. So you've got to keep the wind from him to you. You've got to keep down, you've got to keep a good silhouette, you've got to keep noise down, you've got to be ready to use your weapon. And like they said at that time, the lowest part of cover you can find is where the water runs. Our snipers that went out in Normandy, if they hadn't had that skill, they couldn't have done their job. If you look up, you see the heights of these trees, although they've grown since 1943, you'll see that what was once called the Tarzan course. Everything was off the ground, all the way down. It continued on to the death slide, as it was called. That was a rope that went across the river that you slid down with a toggle rope. God help you if your toggle rope wasn't put across the line right, because you got a nasty rope burn, or failing that, you fell off the ruddy line. This place is ideal. You're very isolated. You've got everything you want. You've got woods, you've got open ground, you've got water, you've got locks, you've got the river, and you could use live ammunition. A lot of people came here with not much confidence, and they went away absolutely confident in themselves and in their friends. I came up here as a young lad of 18. I went out of here as a man, no doubt.
At the end of the 6-week training, you can only imagine how exhausted these trainee commandos were, but they still had one final challenge ahead of them. It was the so-called opposed landings. Basically, what the men had to do was to try to attack a defended beach. And they did so underneath live machine gun fire with mortars and explosions and flares thrown in for good measure. It must have been absolutely terrifying. This is what Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was the Chief of Combined Operations during the war, wrote about it. I shall never forget the impact Agnacarry made on me, and I suspect that neither will those who went through the course, since many told me afterwards they found the real thing less alarming than the opposed landing exercise, which used to finish up each course. This is clearly an experience that none of them would ever forget. It was an experience, though, they were to put to good use, because within 5 months, at the age of 19, Commando Scott and his troop were part of the No. 1 Special Service Brigade at the D-Day invasion of Sword Beach, June the 6th, 1944.
My troop had been briefed with one idea that day: get to the bridges on the Cairn Canal and the Orne River. So we come off the boat, and I got blown over doing it. Johnny Dowling was wounded, Macmillan was wounded, Lieutenant Lewis got done on the beach, Johnny Johnson got wounded. We come up the beach, over the road, into the swamps. The area was flooded by the Germans.
Commando Scott was one of the first to arrive at Pegasus Bridge. He then went on to spend 86 days in action in and around Normandy.
The people that I trained with at Agnacarry, there's about 130 men went down. Out of all them blokes, especially those in 3 Troop as it was then, there was 19 come out. But don't forget, we received reinforcements twice in Normandy. We still come out 19 of us. It's not only to see in Agnacarry House, Agnacarry grounds, also you stand there, you get in front of you, in your mind's eye, faces that come back, and you remember all the old mates. If you don't remember all your old mates, well, I don't think you're much of a man.
Every year, on Remembrance Day, we say, at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Well, remember this too, that not all the battles of the Second World War were fought by men and women in uniform. In their quiet and unassuming way, the people of the countryside did their bit too, and we should remember them.
If I lay face down on the ground, would you walk all over me? Have we learned what we set out to learn? Well then, love, we will see. Now don't drown in your tears, babe. Push your head towards the air. Now don't drown in your tears, babe. I will always be there.
And there's more from Countrywise tomorrow night at 8. And if you'd like to hear about the adventures of filming Countrywise, you can check out Paul Heaney's blog from behind-the-scene pictures online at itv.com/countrywise. And next tonight, domestic disputes in Heartbeat.